Welcome to today's web seminar training, the top 10 things you need to know about extended foster care. My name is Amy Lemley, and I'm the Policy Director at the John Burton Foundation. I will be moderating today's web seminar. We are very pleased today to welcome over 300 registrants to today's web seminar. Before I begin, I want to review the process for participating in today's web seminar. After registering, you should have received an email with a link to the web seminar. Now, when you click on that link, you should be able to view the slideshow. To hear the audio portion, you have two options. You can hear it over the speakers of your computer. You can also call in and hear it over your telephone. To participate in the web seminar over the telephone, the call-in number is the one you see on your screen, 951-266-6121. Then you enter the access code 283-129-625. Following the entry of the access code, a PIN will appear on your computer screen. Once you enter that, you will be able to participate on the web seminar via your telephone. Now, if you'd like to submit live questions during the web seminar, click on the question and answer arrow on your screen, type in your question, and click send. We find that that is often the most interesting part of our web seminars, and we today are going to leave ample time to address your questions. A number of you have submitted questions in advance, and we will do our best to address those today. I also want to let everyone know that today's web seminar is being recorded, and the recording along with the PowerPoint presentation will be available on the California Fostering Connections website as well as the California College Pathways website. And we will provide the information on the links to both of those. Now, today's web seminar is going to discuss important information about how extended foster care can benefit children and youth attending post-secondary education. To discuss this today, we have two presenters, Debbie Rauscher. First, Debbie Rauscher is a project manager here at the John Burton Foundation. Also joining us is Tracy Freed. And Tracy Freed is a consultant with the Foster Youth Success Program, which operates through the Community College Chancellor's Office. So thank you very much for joining us today, Debbie and Tracy. And now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie.
Great. Thank you very much, Amy. So the first thing I want to start out with is a little bit of background. Last year, over 4,600 foster youth aged out of care in California. Of California youth surveyed regarding AB12 last year, 83% indicated a desire to go to college. Studies show, however, that nationally only 25% of youth will complete 1 year of college and only 5% will obtain a 2- or 4-year degree. So you can see from the statistics here that it's clear that emancipating foster youth have aspirations of going to college, and yet there is a major disconnect between those aspirations and reality. These youth are unfortunately not at this point living up to their dreams. Next slide, please. So what are the reasons for this? There's a number of challenges that we know that foster youth currently face when it comes to being successful in higher education. They often do not have adequate housing at the point that they exit care. They don't have the financial resources necessary to go to college. Frequent changes in their home situation and school leave them unprepared. They don't have adult role models necessarily, and they don't have the information that they need about higher education, how to access financial support, what the resources are that are available, etc. Next slide, please. So the exciting thing is that now we have AB12, and AB12 is designed specifically to address a lot of these issues that currently serve as barriers for young people accessing higher education when they are in the foster care system. So the most significant benefit that AB12 is going to provide is an opportunity to access housing through an improved placement. In some cases, youth may even receive the foster care benefit directly. In addition, youth will have access to additional support that they don't currently have when they emancipate, including monthly visits from a social worker, and often, depending on the placement type, additional support from case managers or other support individuals. Regardless of whether somebody chooses to stay in care or not, they do continue to be entitled to health insurance through Medi-Cal, as well as independent living services. So this is sort of the big picture overview of how we think AB12 will help support youth in being able to access higher education. Next slide, please. So what exactly is the California Fostering Connections to Success Act, otherwise known as AB12? It was signed into law in September of 2010 and just went into effect almost 2 months ago. So January 1st, 2012, AB12 officially went into effect. It was designed to align with the Federal Fostering Connections to Success Act. So this is a key component, because what this means is that because of federal legislation passed, this allowed California to extend foster care and access federal Title IV benefits in order to pay for the extension of foster care. So this is really what makes AB12 feasible. What it does, broadly speaking, is it extends the availability of foster care funding for youth until age 20. Now you can see on your slide there's sort of a parentheses 21 there. The reason that that's there is that at this point what AB12 does is provides an additional 2 years of foster care support, so until a young person's 20th birthday. With additional legislative approval, this may actually be extended for a 3rd year up until age 21. And so there's going to be a lot of work done by the AB12 co-sponsors to ensure that we get this 3rd year of care over the next couple of years. But for now, what we know is that we have this access for young people to stay in care for 2 additional years. Next slide, please. So in the past, before AB12, the child welfare system and the post-secondary education systems really didn't overlap. Typically, young people, even if they did stay in the child welfare system past the age of 18, it was usually in order to complete high school. And so at the point that they were exiting child welfare would potentially be the point that they were entering post-secondary education. Those two things didn't really overlap. Next slide, please. Now, with AB12, we have a different situation. So as you can see from the slide, child welfare and post-secondary education overlap for a period of time in the life of a foster youth. This extension of foster care beyond age 18 creates a whole new opportunity for leveraging resources to support foster youth. And it makes the creation of a bridge between these two systems that much more imperative, because they're going to be functioning simultaneously in the life of any given young person who's remaining in the foster care system. Next slide, please. So what can you, as somebody who works in the field of post-secondary education, do to play a role in ensuring that students access these services? There's a number of different ways that higher education professionals can play a crucial role. And I think that in order for AB12 to really be a success, it's going to take not just child welfare personnel, but really it's going to take a whole range of institutions to support these young people, and most crucially, I think, those in higher education. So we're going to be talking about each one of these items in more detail as we go through the presentation, but I wanted to give sort of kind of an overview of what you can be thinking about as we talk about the details of AB12 in terms of the role that post-secondary education professionals can play. One crucial piece is assisting students to meet the eligibility criteria, so making sure that the maximum number of individuals meet the eligibility requirements so that they can access the benefits. Helping students to be successful in housing. For most of these young people, this is going to be the first time that they're sort of moving out into the world on their own, into their own housing situation. Understanding the benefits of extended foster care and how students can re-enter, and we're going to talk in more detail later in the presentation about what it means to re-enter foster care. Engage in systems-level collaboration with a local child welfare agency. And again, we're going to talk about this more, but it's not just necessarily about supporting individuals one by one, but also about making new connections between post-secondary education systems and the child welfare agency in your local community to support these young people on a more systematic level. And then also providing guidance about how to effectively negotiate disputes, really supporting young people and advocating for themselves to get the most out of the extended foster care system. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Tracy Freed. So as Amy mentioned, Tracy is a consultant with the Community College Chancellor's Office working on the Foster Youth Success Initiative program. Tracy and I have worked very closely over the last few months around issues related to this coordination between child welfare and higher education. And she's going to go through the first few of our top 10 specific items that you should understand about AB12. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
Thanks, Debbie. And I want to share with you, before we go forward, being that I attend, for those of you who may have had the opportunity to attend any of the convenings of stakeholders over the last year and a half that were held in Oakland or Los Angeles or Sacramento, quite daunting and overwhelming to try to absorb all of the detailed information as related to AB12. And so really it's been a year now, Debbie, I just realized that you and I have been working closely together, and even more so the last few months, as you mentioned, to figure out what are the key messages and the key pertinent areas that representatives in higher education institutions need to know in order to really provide that support and education for our students who may otherwise not be receiving it from someone else, whether they're not connected to somebody else or that person, for whatever reason wasn't, may be after today's call you'll have much more knowledge than that individual. So following our last webinar that we did focus on access to AB12 as it relates to higher education, we were looking at what are the top 10 areas that you really need to know. And so we are working closely together on developing several tools specifically designed for you in higher education to provide support for you as you're working with our students. Again, these will not be documents to give to the students, but rather simple tip sheets, if you will, on basic information on what you need to know so that you could help current and former foster youth understand the benefits of continuing in care and why they'd want to, as well as how to access it. Further, I want to say one last thing about that before we get into the Midwest study, and that is the critical role you do play. And so often we may not realize that. Lastly, I want to bring to your attention something that I could see becoming confusing very soon if we don't start sharing these transition terminologies that are being used. So right now we call it AB12. We also refer to it, so for those of you who have a pen or pencil, write this down. AB12, which is the Act, is really the Foster Care to Success Act. Did I just say that right, Debbie? Foster Care to Success Act for California's youth.
Fostering Connections to
Thank
Success
you. I
Act.
knew I was saying it wrong. Fostering Connections Act, Fostering Connections to Success Act. So if you hear Fostering Connections to Success Act or see any documents come out with that language, that is AB12. Or if you hear Extended Foster Care, or as you see, number 1 is the acronym EFC, is Extended Foster Care. So use them synonymously. They're all referring to AB12, which is Extending Foster Care, and it is the California Fostering Connections to Success Act. So with that said,
this is Amy. Tracy, this is Amy. I'm getting quite a bit of feedback that people are having a hard time understanding you. I'm not sure if maybe it's the microphone in your telephone, but could you please maybe speak a little bit more slowly and a little bit more closely to the phone?
You know what? I will take off my headset, and then maybe that's helpful. So just shoot me a text if you can or something. Let me know if this is better.
That is better. Thank you very much.
Better. Okay. Because I was going to say I didn't have coffee this morning, you guys. So. But anyways, so I will slow down and just recap very slowly but quickly what I shared that is important. AB12 was the Assembly Bill, which put into place in California the Fostering Connections to Success Act. it's referring to our students to have students in foster care have the opportunity to benefit from extended foster care. Why is this important? The Midwest study was a longitudinal study that interviewed 732 youth 4 times over 6 years and found that the value of extending foster care goes beyond just being the right thing to do. The study compared youth who accessed foster care benefits after the age of 18 to those who did not. Extended care resulted in significant positive outcomes for foster youth and society. In particular, as you can see from the statistics cited on the slide, that youth who have access to foster care until age 21 are 3 times more likely to complete 1 year of college and 2.5 times more likely to obtain a bachelor's degree. In addition, having access to foster care up to age 21 was associated with 38% reduction in the risk of becoming pregnant. So as you can see, the passing of this legislation is just monumental for our young people. So AB12 presents tremendous opportunities for young people in foster care to have dramatically improved educational outcomes. And to make this vision a reality for California's foster youth, you, all of you out there that are representing higher education, are a key player for our young people in the implementation of AB12. Thank you. Next slide. So as you heard Debbie mention, extended foster care, or AB12, began effective January 1st, 2012. And for the first year, benefits will extend to youth up to 19th year, and then and ultimately it's being rolled out over 3 years, with benefits becoming available to youth up to 19 for this year, and then extending up to age 20 in the year 2013, sorry. And then in order, this is very important, in order for the final year of the extended foster care to go into effect, the legislature must approve it prior to January 1st, 2014. Next slide. So youth turning 18, who's eligible? What does this really mean when we're talking about rolling out? First of all, any youth that turns 18 after January 1st, 2012 and meets other eligibility criteria is eligible to have extended benefit care. In addition, if someone turned 18 last year in 2011 but still had an open court case on January 1st, they also meet the ageability requirements. In some cases, a case can be kept open after the age of 18 in order for a youth to finish high school, or in some cases, the court chose to retain jurisdiction even if the youth had already finished high school. In either circumstance, as long as the case was open on January 1st, this criteria is met. So for example, if a youth turned 18 on November 15th, 2011, and she was still in high school with an expected graduation date of June of this year, the court kept her case open. She now qualifies for extended benefits even though she turned 18 last year. Next slide, please. Extended benefits available to foster youth include the following. Some of the key components for accessing extended care and understanding who is eligible are as follows. So number one, any young person who had an open dependency court case with an order for out-of-home placement when they turn 18 is eligible. This is true even if they are on AWOL status or awaiting placement. So it's very important to understand that. Any young person with an open dependency court case with an order of out-of-home placement when they turn 18 is eligible. When we say out-of-home placement, that means any youth that's basically waiting a foster care placement. Oh, can we go back? Thanks. Number two, youth must also satisfy a participation requirement. There are several options for how a youth can satisfy this requirement, and we will discuss those more in a moment. Third, youth must sign an agreement that outlines the youth's and the county's respective responsibilities. Signing the agreement is not a condition of payment, so they're not at risk of getting dropped from foster care at 18 just because a form wasn't signed, but it must be signed within 6 months of their 18th birthday. Again, they won't lose their benefits if they haven't signed it on their 18th birthday, but they must sign the form within 6 months of their 18th birthday. Number 4, the youth must be willing to meet monthly with their social worker or probation officer and update their transitional independent living plan at least every 6 months and live in a setting that has been approved or licensed by the child welfare agency of that county. And we will also be discussing these types of placement options later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Categories of youth who are eligible versus ineligible. Parenting youth on the left side are eligible and in some circumstances may receive the foster care payment directly. A parenting non-minor dependent living independently can receive the foster care payment plus an additional supplement for the cost of care of their child. Let me share with you non-minor dependent. That's another term that you might want to go ahead and write down right now because you're going to start hearing it more and more frequently. It's a new term that we've been utilizing to refer to students, or excuse me, young people that remain in foster care after the age 18. So they're no longer a dependent. They're no longer a minor, excuse me. However, they remain a dependent. Therefore, the terminology non-minor dependent. Okay? Again, non-minor dependent means those youth choosing to remain under the foster care system to receive extended foster care benefits, and they're a dependent, but they're a non-minor dependent. For parenting non-minor dependents in a licensed or approved facility, both the regular payment and the payment for their child, known as the infant supplement, would be paid directly to the provider, such as the foster parent or the transitional housing provider, rather than going directly to that youth. This is important to understand, as sometimes parenting youth believe they're entitled to receive the infant supplement directly, when that's not the case, which can create confusion and frustration. So again, the funding, if a non-minor dependent and their child is living with a foster parent or in a transitional housing situation, the payments would go directly to the provider, not to the youth themselves. So again, to avoid that confusion, it's really important to understand that. Sometimes that the youth might think they are entitled to receive that infant supplement directly themselves, but that is not the case, and this way we can avoid confusion and frustration. Involvement in the criminal justice system does not disqualify young adults from participating in AB12. It may restrict what placements are available to them, but they are still entitled to get the benefits of extended care. Getting married or joining the military, however, are the two conditions that are disqualifying for extended benefits. So again, if they're married or join the military, they are no longer eligible to remain in extended care. Next slide, please. Other eligible populations. Youth who enter a non-related legal guardianship. The guardianship must be created in juvenile court, not probate court, but the youth are eligible for the extended payments regardless of the age the guardianship was created. So let me provide some clarity here. For example, a foster youth can be placed through the juvenile court with somebody who's a family friend or somebody who's not a relative, but they can be placed in a legal guardianship. So they are in foster care in a guardianship placement. Those youth would be eligible. However, let's say a youth, which there's thousands and thousands of youth in California who have nothing to do with the child welfare system, that are in guardianship placements with relatives or friends or whomever, that go through the different court process. Those youth are not eligible, so it's very different. For youth who enter KINGAP or are adopted, extended payments beyond the age of 18 are only available if the guardianship or adoption was created after the youth turned 16. There are some exceptions to this for youth with disabilities or youth who are completing high school before the age of 19. So you do see some similarities here to some requirements by with CHAPE and or the FAFSA. So again, youth in guardianships or with adoptive parents don't have the same placement options as youth with open cases in the foster care system. In particularly, we will talk later about how you can receive payments directly in some circumstances. Youth in guardianships or receiving adoption assistance payments do not have the option to receive payments directly, as these payments can only go to the guardian or adoptive parent. So let me just repeat that because I know this can be confusing. If a youth is living in a guardianship placement or within in an adoption that has been adopted and that family is receiving adoption assistance funds, then that youth would not be receiving the money. Those payments can only go to their guardian or their adoptive parent, okay? Thank you. Next slide. Eligible juvenile probation youth. So this is really important because, I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure, is everyone able to hear me okay? I'm just going to do a quick check-in. I'm on a, can Amy or Debbie just let me know if I'm doing okay? I want to make sure if people are not having a problem hearing me. Okay, so I'm going to continue and let you know about our probation youth. I often notice that we receive a lot of calls from community colleges around California for clarity around probation youth who are wards of the court that are in foster care placements. So those youth who are under the jurisdiction of probation but are in out-of-home care are considered and are eligible for AB12 because they are considered in foster care, even if they are under the jurisdiction of probation. For example, in LA County, they have approximately 22,000 youth on probation. Of those, approximately 10% or 2,200 youth might be on probation but in out-of-home foster care placements. Those 2,200 youth would be the youth who will be eligible, okay? So it's very distinct. At the time probation ends, youth may be eligible for a new transition jurisdiction, which enables them to access AB12 benefits without having to stay in the juvenile probation or delinquency system. This new jurisdiction can also be used by youth who wish to re-enter. If youth are working with a former ward, they can potentially access AB12 benefits without having to re-enter the delinquency system and can instead re-enter through the dependency system. This option can make the prospect of staying in or re-entering foster care more appealing than if a youth were required to remain in the probation system and continue to be supervised by a probation officer. So it's really important to have that clarification. Next slide, please. Extended foster care requires youth to do certain things to participate. Participation conditions are, which is number 4 on the item of our top 10 list. I'm sorry, and let me clarify. When you see these numbers on the top, some of our slides have numbers. These are from our top 10 that we will provide to you on a separate sheet that are really essential for you to be aware of so that when you are meeting with current or former foster youth, you could provide them with the proper knowledge to let them know what is entailed in receiving extended foster care benefits and how to access them. Being enrolled in high school or pursuing their GED. Number 2, being enrolled in college or a vocational school. Participating in a program or activity that removes barriers to employment. Work at least 80 hours a month, or if they're unable to do one of the above mentioned because of a medical or mental health condition. The conditions are going to high school or college, working half-time, or participating in an activity to remove barriers to employment. Youth who are unable to do one of these 4 things because of a medical or mental health condition also do qualify. Each young adult must meet at least one of these 5 participation conditions. Thank you. Next slide. Defining participation in post-secondary education. So there was a lot of discussion around this, and we, again, did our best to focus really on ensuring students have stability and support with housing and basic benefits to survive. So half-time requirement. In order to provide a safety net for these young people, most at risk, the participation conditions were defined by design very broadly. So that's what I was just beginning to allude to. In order to qualify under condition number 2, which is the post-secondary education, a student must be enrolled at least half-time, and non-credit courses such as remedial courses or basic skills classes count towards this requirement. Verification does not need to be in the form of an official transcript. It can include an unofficial transcript, a copy of an electronic course schedule, or a letter from the institution, etc. Per federal law, students maintain their eligibility over scheduled breaks, including summer break, and are not required to take classes to keep their housing. It is anticipated that some youth will struggle and end up dropping classes or experiencing other problems. Participation condition number 3, removing barriers to employment, is defined very broadly and can be used to maintain eligibility during these transition periods. Examples of eligible activities include volunteering, mental health or substance abuse treatment, participating in ILP classes, enrollment in one college course, driver's education, or job search activities. And this is not by any means a complete list. This is simply an example. A youth may sign up for 2 courses, for example, but subsequently realize that one of the classes is too challenging and decide to drop the class. Even though they no longer meet the higher education criteria because they're not taking 2 classes, they still can maintain benefits through the removing barriers criteria until the next term when they are able to sign up for courses more suited to their skill level. Condition number 3 is meant to be used as a short-term stopgap condition, primarily to ensure that the youth do not lose their safety net while during periods of transition while they reassess their long-term goals. Next slide, please. Child welfare and court supervision. The youth will have monthly interactions with a social worker or probation officer, ongoing court hearings and administrative reviews, and a transitional independent living plan known as a TILP, T-I-L-P. Although there is much more independence in extended care than when the student was a minor, they do have to be willing to participate in certain activities. The creation of the TILP, the Transitional Independent Living Plan, is done collaboratively between the student and the social worker or probation officer. This is an area where you can play a key role by helping the student to determine what are realistic goals and timelines in achieving those goals that can be used to create this plan. I want to add one more thing with the importance of this. We have done extensive efforts over the last few years through the Foster Youth Success Initiative to really identify community partners and build those relationships since the onset of FYSI 5 years ago. And with that, we really focus on building those partnerships with your county child welfare agencies, your juvenile courts, your ILP coordinators, your foster youth services coordinators, transitional living programs, and others serving the student population. As you can see with this new law to support extended care, those partnerships are even going to be more essential than ever now to really support youth being successful in higher education and in their path into adulthood. Next slide, please. Thank you. Youth, this is number 5 of the top 10. Youth may have many options as to where they can live. The fact that the youth have an extended foster care, have many different placement options, is super important, and that's why it's part of our top 10 list. The first 6 options listed on the slide are all current foster care placements: living with a relative or non-related extended family member, living with a foster family, living with a non-related legal guardian, which again, when you see those, it sounds confusing, the living with a relative or non-related extended family care. That's with someone who's like an aunt or like a grandmother or like a second parent. Or a non-related legal guardian could be a relative, best friend, or someone you've known your whole life. That would be living with a non-related legal guardian. Living in a dual agency home. These are for youth with developmental disabilities, or living in a group home, or participating in supported independent living through the THPP program. The final 2 new options created under AB12 are THP plus foster care and supervised independent living. Supervised independent living is, you'll see the acronym SILP, S-I-L-P. And we'll discuss that in a little bit more later. Youth can stay living in any of these once they turn 18 with some restrictions on THPP and the group homes that will be described later. Another very important factor in helping young people make informed decisions about staying in foster care is understanding their housing options, including the fact that there are new options that weren't available to them previously as minors. Thank you. Next slide, please. Group homes and THPP after 18. Youth can stay in group homes or THPP only until they complete high school or turn 19, whichever comes first. So let me repeat that. This is really important. Not that I've ever really heard youth say they want to stay in their group home placement, but youth can stay in group homes or in their THPP only until they complete high school or turn 19, whichever comes first. A youth who has a medical or mental health condition that prevents them from working or going to school may also be allowed to stay in a group home, but group home placements are meant to be short-term. It's really important to keep that in mind. Because of the restrictions on group homes and THPP, social workers or probation officers will need to work with these young adults in these placements to transition out. It is anticipated that once THP plus foster care is available, this will be a good option for many of these youth. Thank you so much. I'm now going to turn it back over to Debbie.
Thank you, Tracy, very, very much. So I'm going to sort of take it from here and talk about the two new placement options that Tracy mentioned that will be available under extended foster care. So the first one is called THP Plus Foster Care, which stands for Transitional Housing Program. That's what the THP stands for.
I'm going to sit down here for the duration, but if you need me,
Okay. And so the THP Plus Foster Care Program is going to be modeled after the existing THP Plus program, which people may be familiar with. So what THP Plus currently does is it provides transitional housing for young people who have emancipated from the foster care system, so they get a place to live. Generally they're living independently, and they receive support services as well from a case manager who can provide employment, education support, and various other things. THP Plus Foster Care is going to be a Title IV-E eligible placement. So what that means is it's not for emancipated foster youth, but it is actually for foster youth, for youth who are continuing on in the system. But in terms of its structure, it'll look very similar to the existing THP Plus program. The existing THP Plus program will also continue to exist to serve emancipated youth between 21 and 24, or those who are under the age of 21 who either don't want to participate in extended foster care or are not eligible. Unfortunately, the implementation of the THP Plus foster care program has been delayed for a little bit, so we're hoping that the regulations will be out from the state very soon, at which point counties will be able to start implementing this new program. So keep your eyes open for when this actually gets started, but it should be soon that this new option is available. Next slide. So the number 6 on our top 10 list of important things that you need to understand is that students are actually able to live independently and in some circumstances get the foster care payment directly. So this is a really, really different model than what we currently see in the foster care system for minors. So as Tracy mentioned, this new option is known as the SILP, is the acronym, which stands for the Supervised Independent Living Placement. And this allows somebody in the foster care system to live on their own. They can be living in an apartment or in a shared housing situation. They can be renting a room, which could be just from a commercial landlord, or it could be renting a room for a relative, from a relative or a family friend. It also includes living in dorms or any other kind of university-sponsored housing situation. So again, if a student is living in a SILP, they may be entitled to receive the foster care benefit directly. It is, however, limited to the basic rate, which is $776. If somebody is parenting, they are entitled to receive the infant supplement, and the term infant supplement is just the sort of official term that's used
I'm going to
in
read the
the child
letters
welfare
now,
system.
but I'm going to have to.
Tracy, are you?
Hold for a moment. I think, Tracy, we need you to mute. Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, yeah. So the term infant supplement is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not just available for infants. So I just wanted to clarify that. It just means that a parenting student has a child in their custody. There's no restrictions on the age of that child limiting it to an infant. So if somebody does have a child, then in addition to the $776, they can get this supplemental payment of $411. And we are anticipating that this new option is something that many students will be interested in and will make the idea of staying in the foster care system much more appealing than if they were restricted to some of the other existing placement options. So this is a really crucial piece for folks to understand. Next slide, please. So a couple of other things to know about the SILP is that it is a very independent living situation. There is no service provider, there's no caregiver. So unlike, somebody's with a foster parent, the foster parent has certain responsibilities to assist them, or if they're in something like a transitional housing program, there's a case manager. There's nothing like that in the SILP. So it really is very independent and designed for individuals who are ready to live in this type of independent setting. Because of that, in order to access a SILP, the student is subject to a readiness assessment. So the social worker will work with the young person to determine if they have the ability to handle daily tasks, if they have financial skills like budgeting and money management, and if they have the ability to be independent. This also does include an assessment of affordability. So, for example, if somebody is going to be receiving the $776 and they don't have another source of income, if they find a place to live that costs $900 a month, then they wouldn't be approved for that particular SILP because obviously they wouldn't have enough income to support it. Or if they don't have a stable income to support, if they need additional money in order to support the cost of a particular unit, they need to have stable income that shows that they can support that. So that's going to be a key component. In addition to the financial piece, readiness includes assessing things like whether they have the ability to grocery shop and prepare meals, to budget their expenses, and in particular with students, if they're getting a financial aid payment, that they have an understanding of if they're getting a lump sum at the beginning of the term that they're going to need to use to cover their living expenses over the entire semester, that they understand that and understand what it means to budget those funds accordingly. And so that's one of the requirements of the SILP. Next slide, please. In addition, SILP sites are subject to a health and safety inspection. So one thing I want to point out is that if somebody is living in a college dorm or some other type of university housing, the site is not subject to the health and safety inspection, so it doesn't apply. But if they're living in their own apartment, renting a room, living with roommates, etc., then there is this health and safety inspection. It does assess just basic health and safety issues, so things like whether there's a working toilet available in the unit, that there's no major vermin infestation, those kinds of issues would disallow a site. On the other hand, if there's maintenance issues in the unit, peeling paint or cracked tile or something like that that doesn't pose any sort of safety issue, that wouldn't disqualify us as a site. The inspection also does include occupancy standards that limit that no more than 2 adults can be sharing a room. However, social workers and probation officers do have some flexibility around this, and they can waive that occupancy requirement in some circumstances. For example, several young adults are sharing a loft space together or something like that. So that's the one area that there is flexibility. Social workers also are required to ensure youth privacy in this process. So one of the things that means is that roommates and landlords are not assessed. So if people are familiar at all with kind of how the existing foster care system works, if somebody is moving into a placement with a foster parent or a relative caregiver, There's background checks that are done, and looking at criminal background history, etc. That doesn't apply to the SILT. So there's no requirement that the roommates get background checks or anything like that. Social workers are required to work with the young people around how to make good decisions around roommates and that type of thing to ensure their own safety. In addition, social workers need to arrange inspections and home visits in such a way that respects a young adult's privacy. So the young adult might not want their roommates to know that they're in foster care and such, but there is this requirement that there be home visits. So the social workers will need to work with young people around how to complete the requirements and simultaneously respect privacy. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention something called a shared living agreement because this, I think, will be a useful tool. This is a tool that can be used with a caregiver or a roommate, and it's basically a document that, let's say somebody is living with a foster parent and they turn 18 and they're going to stay in that situation, but now they're an adult. And so it makes sense to kind of renegotiate what the rules are going to be in that setting so that it's clear what the expectations are. This is a tool that a caregiver can use to sit down with a young person and talk through what's the curfew going to be, what's the rule around overnight guests, what is the rule around using the kitchen. They have to allow access to a kitchen, but they could say you can't cook past a certain time because of the noise it creates or something like that. It also includes things about allowances or passing along money. So if the foster care payment is going to the foster parent, perhaps they're giving a certain amount of money every month to the young person to manage directly. So there is a tool that's been created to help assist with this process that will be available soon on the California Fostering Connections website. So I'll be sending out some information after the webinar with links to resources and including that website. And so this may be a really useful way that folks who work with foster youth who are in extended foster care can help young people to negotiate with the people with whom they're living to make sure that the living situation is meeting their needs. Next slide, please. The seventh thing to understand about extended foster care is that as legal adults, youth in extended foster care have new rights. And the reason that this is important to understand is because if there are young people who are reluctant to stay in foster care despite the benefits, they've had a bad experience in the foster care system and they turn 18 and they say, forget it, I'm out of here, I don't want to stay in this system, but it's clear that they would benefit from having that additional support for a little while longer. It's important to know that you can explain to young people that in extended foster care, their rights are different from what they were as minors. So what you see on the slide are some examples. This is definitely not a comprehensive list of all of the new rights. But for example, they have the right to control their own cash and property. They have the right to own a car. They have control over their own health care decisions. There's things like if there's internet access in the home, it has to be made available to the youth. They're allowed to be left at home unsupervised overnight. They can take trips, to go on a long weekend trip skiing or something like that. They have to have access to items needed for cooking and cleaning. So again, this is not a comprehensive list of the new licensing standards, but it's to give you a sense of some of the changes and how young adults will be treated differently in extended foster care than what their situation may have been as a minor. Next slide, please. Some additional legal rights that they have, their parents are no longer noticed or parties to the court hearing, and the court process also respects their status as a legal adult. So the focus is now on planning for a transition to independence. There's no warrants issued for AWOL anymore. If you're a minor and you go AWOL from your placement there's an actual warrant issued. That's not the case for adults. The court can no longer order the young adult to take psychiatric medications. Again, the young person has the discretion to choose to access any sort of medical care or refuse medical care. So it's important that students understand that the judges will no longer have this authority and that they actually do have quite a bit more autonomy as young adults if they're in the extended foster care system. Next slide, please. Something else I wanted to mention in terms of what role folks in post-secondary education can play around extended foster care is assisting young people to resolve disputes. So, there may be disputes around eligibility. There will likely be disputes around placements, in particular around the question of a SILP, where a young person has a particular SILP setting in mind that they want to live in, and perhaps the social worker feels like it's not a safe setting for them, or that they don't meet the standards of the readiness assessment. The first step, of course, in resolving any dispute is to refer the youth to the social worker or the probation officer that they're working with. Ideally, these types of things can be worked out collaboratively between the young person and the social worker. And you, as a support person for the youth in foster care, can provide guidance about how to negotiate with the social worker, how to demonstrate that they're ready for the SILP or that it is a safe setting or whatever it is that the issue is. If it turns out that the young person can't work it out with the social worker directly, another option is to assist the youth to contact their attorney. Any young person in the extended foster care system will continue to have an attorney available to them. Youth also have the right to have disputes resolved in court. So this is another avenue that they have. If there's a dispute around placement or something like that, they can go to court to work this out. Communities are required to have local grievance processes, so depending on which county you live in, it could be helpful to find out exactly what the local grievance process is so that you can refer students that you're working with what that process is. And finally, complaints can also always be filed with the state foster care ombudsman, and the phone number for that is on the screen. One thing I wanted to say about going to court is just to be aware that there's a couple of different ways that a young person can take a dispute to court. They have regular 6-month reviews, and if they that's one avenue that they could bring up an issue, is when they go to their regular 6-month court review hearing. They also can contact their attorney if it's something more pressing. They do have the option to request what's called submit a walk-on request, which is something that their attorney could do, which is where they ask to go before a judge prior to their next 6-month review. And youth are entitled to bring other people to these hearings if they so choose. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest, most common questions that I get asked about AB12 and how it relates to higher education is how foster care benefits will interact with financial aid. So we have done some research on this and have some information, but we're also waiting for official guidance to be issued by the Federal Department of Education. So there is a specific exemption in foster care regulations that says that funds that are authorized under Title IV-E, which is what foster care funds are explicitly exempt from being reported as income on the FAFSA. So we're optimistic that Title IV-E payments, these foster care payments, won't count towards income as financial aid. But again, we've been working with the 3 different systems, the Community College Chancellor's Office, as well as the CSU and UC systems, to get some guidance from the Department of Education so that we can give a clear answer to this question. So once we have that information, we will certainly be distributing it through all of our various email lists and such. Eligibility for CAFE grants does remain the same. That doesn't change through AB12. Next slide, please. So the 9th thing that's important to understand is that youth have a right to re-enter foster care. So this is really a new protocol that is really important to understand. Youth do have to be informed they have the right to re-enter at the termination hearing, and they can re-enter unlimited times prior to turning the maximum age for eligibility for extended foster care. So again, if somebody turns 18 and they just really want to be out on their own and they haven't been happy with the foster care system and they say, I'm out of here, and then 3 months later it turns out that they're on the verge of being homeless, or it's just a lot harder out there than they thought it was going to be, and you are working with them, they're in community college or something like that, and you realize that they really could benefit from that extra $776 a month plus the support of the social worker, they do have the right to go back. So just because they choose to leave, they still have the option to go back into foster care. The process is intended to be as accessible and easy as possible. And next slide, please. The process for reentry, basically the youth would contact the child welfare agency, and we're still waiting to actually get the final regulations from the state on how the reentry process is going to work, and it may be slightly different from county to county in terms of who the key contact people are and that type of thing. But what we do know is that the young person will need to sign what's called a voluntary reentry agreement, and that triggers immediate eligibility for benefits. And so as soon as they sign that agreement and move into a qualified placement, they get to start receiving the benefits right away. So they don't have to wait to go to court or go through some lengthy process. It is a very quick process to get back into the system. In addition, the initial meeting with the social worker temporarily satisfies the participation condition requirement. So a young person doesn't have to be in school half-time or working half-time before they reenter. If they're struggling and in a really difficult situation, they can reenter, talk with the social worker about what their intentions are in terms of re-enrolling in school or enrolling in school or finding a job or engaging in substance abuse treatment, which meets the barriers to employment condition or whatever that is. And they can get back into foster care even if they haven't quite yet figured out what they're going to be doing, and then they have a little bit of time to work that out. Once they sign that voluntary reentry agreement, the county agency has 15 days to file a court petition, and then it goes from there. There's other requirements about actually the young person going to court and officially reentering and such. So I would recommend that folks contact their local child welfare agency to get information about the specific provisions for reentry and how that works logistically in your community. Next slide, please. So the 10th and final thing that you should understand about extended foster care is that you can play an important role in ensuring that these youth access services. And as we said in the beginning, the success of AB12 just cannot lie on child welfare systems alone. It really has to include other partners as active participants to make sure that this really is a success and that we see the kind of outcomes that we talked about in the beginning from the Midwest study, and 3 times as many people accessing college and 2.5 times getting bachelor's degrees, and those are the kinds of outcomes, or even better, that we want to see. So to sort of recap what we talked about and how you can play a role in this, assisting students to meet eligibility, so making sure that they continue to meet one of those 5 participation requirements and maintain their eligibility for extended foster care. Supporting them in planning for independence. The idea here is that these additional 2 years don't just serve as an additional 2 years in foster care where the person comes out with no skills to be able to transition into independence. The goal here is that these 2 years are spent helping young people to learn skills, to move forward with their goals, to plan for their own independence, so that when they come out of extended foster care, when they meet the maximum age criteria, that they really are able to transition into being successful adults. Guidance in negotiating the shared living agreements. We're anticipating that disputes around sort of placements and the living situations are going to come up, and this is a key way that you can help somebody in negotiating these shared living agreements so that they don't blow out of their placement and leave the foster care system entirely. Assisting students to understand what the benefits are and how to reenter. This is such a crucial piece. If you have somebody who's eligible and they're not accessing these benefits, to be able to explain to them what the benefits are, all of those things that we talked about how the legal rights change and that they can get the funds directly to be in a supervised independent living placement, and the respect for their privacy and all of those issues, so that they really understand how this system is intended to function and how they can get the most out of it, and how they logistically can get back into the system if they have chosen to leave previously. Offering guidance about how to negotiate disputes over eligibility or placement. Again, we talked about that. It's about being able to refer them to their social worker or their attorney or the different options that they have around disputes. And then finally, last but certainly not least, engaging in systems-level collaboration with your local child welfare agency. So in addition to assisting individual youth, you can encourage your institution to reach out to the local county child welfare agency about how to better collaborate on a system-wide level. Some counties already have existing partnerships, others don't. It's something that we highly recommend that all communities develop, and there are definitely models that we can assist you with in terms of how to set up where the higher education representatives and child welfare come together once a quarter or once a month or something like that and talk about how to most effectively collaborate to support foster youth educational goals. Next slide, please. So what can you do right now? Begin talking with youth. Can you skip an extra slide there? Begin talking with youth who may be eligible about the benefits of foster care. Inform other staff at your school who may come in contact with foster youth about AB12. Initiate this kind of collaboration that I talked about a minute ago. Provide a resource list to your local child welfare agency. So this can be a really important one. If your child welfare agency, if the staff don't necessarily know who the Foster Youth Success Initiative liaison is, or if you have a Guardian Scholars program, or how to contact the financial aid office or the admissions office at the local community college, to put together a list of who are the key contact people who can specifically support foster youth entering higher education, and make sure that the child welfare agency has that information and provides it to the social workers who are working with this population. And finally, I want to let folks know about the opportunity to schedule an on-site training for your campus. So this training that we just did here as a webinar is also available as an on-site in-person training. When we do it on site, the form is a little bit different. Obviously, in a webinar, it's just presenters speaking with some opportunity for questions at the end. When we do it in person, there's a lot more opportunity to interact, and we actually discuss, we brainstorm around different ways that collaboration can happen, and it's a more interactive workshop when we do it in person. And we're available to do these at campuses around the state. We have a number of them already scheduled, and we're looking to do more, and it's free and available to you, and we will come to you. You just have to sort of provide a space and invite the folks to come. And so the next slide, can go to the next slide, please, provides my contact information. So Debbie@johnburtonfoundation.org. And please feel free to email me if you're interested in scheduling one of these presentations at your campus. Also on this slide is the website that we have mentioned a couple of times, cafosteringconnections.org, which is where a copy of the recording of this presentation will be posted, and there's a whole host of other information on there as well about AB12. One final thing I wanted to mention before we go to questions is that we are going to be sending an email to all of you that has a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as a very, very brief 5-question survey to see how you found this presentation and if you found it useful. And it's really important to us to get your feedback. So if you can please just take, it just takes a couple of minutes to do the survey when you get that email. If you can take a couple of minutes and provide that feedback, it would be very much appreciated. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to see if we've had any questions that we want to talk about.
Absolutely. We've had a very lively group. I mean, this group, we do a lot of web seminars, and I don't recall one that was quite so engaged during the whole web seminar. Lots of really good questions, and we will do our best to get through as many as possible. One question is, this is for you, Debbie, will foster care benefits impact youth eligibility for food stamps?
So yes, basically youth in the foster care system are not eligible for food stamps, so it does impact their eligibility. They can't vote, they can't get food stamps while they're actively enrolled in extended foster care.
Okay. A second one, just quick follow-up. You mentioned the prohibition on marriage. Is that the case even if it is to foster youth?
To another foster youth?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay.
Marriage, no matter who you're married to, it does disqualify you.
Okay. The next one is a comment, but I want to share it because I think the group will find it really useful. This is from Connie Hernandez-Robbins, who we know and love, and she writes, I'm working with a student who is currently receiving extended foster care benefits. And one thing I've discovered is the payment comes to the student at the end of the month and may be as long as mid-month after the rent is due. It will be important to work with University Housing to inform them of students who are getting this payment and the conditions of when it will be provided. So that is some real expertise, something that's happening in the field. So thank you, Connie, for sharing that. And you raise a really important point, trying to actually make this payment sync up with what the needs of the university are. Another question is, Debbie, this is for you. What happens if the youth does not agree with the social worker's readiness assessment? They feel, the young person feels like they are ready for a SILP, but the readiness assessment as conducted by the social worker indicates that they are not. What recourse do they have?
So they do have access to whatever the local grievance process is, and again, that will be defined within the local community. So in a lot of cases, communities are using something that's called a team decision-making meeting that brings a group of people together with the young person to talk through what the issues are and sort of reevaluate the decision. In addition, if the young person, if they utilize that informal grievance process and they don't receive an outcome that satisfies them, or if they just are not interested in that grievance process, they also do have the right to go to court. So they can contact their attorney, go to court, make their case to the judge, and ultimately the judge can make the decision one way or another as to whether or not they are allowed to access that particular placement.
Okay. Another question, Debbie, is will a social worker have to physically visit the student in his or her dorm, or could they possibly visit with the non-minor dependent on the college campus?
So there is a federal requirement that at least 51% of the monthly visits do have to take place in the home. So, so the answer to that is yes, at least basically 6 times out of the year, the social worker will have to actually visit the person in their dorm. For the other visits, they can meet with them on the college campus or at a coffee shop or whatever, but there do have to be a certain number of visits that actually take place physically where the person is living.
Now the next question is about a young person, juvenile probation. Tracy, would you like to answer this one, or Debbie, would you like to answer it?
Well, why don't you throw it out there?
Okay. What if a probation youth was in a Title 40 placement and then went into the hall, turned 18 while in the hall? Is that youth still eligible for extended foster care when they leave the hall?
Debbie, we just had
that's
interesting.
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I would actually like to defer that and say that whoever asked that question, if you want to email me directly, and we can connect and talk about it, because there actually has just recently, like literally as of yesterday, been some guidance issued by the federal government about whether somebody is eligible who's in juvenile hall. And so it depends. I would need more information basically to figure out exactly what their legal status is and what their order for out-of-home placement says and such. So if you have those individual type situations, feel free to contact me directly, and we can sort of talk through the particulars and try to figure out if the person is eligible or not.
Okay. The next question I am going to actually address, it's related to THP Plus and the SILP. It's something that we have been talking a lot about, and let me find your question. If a youth sits down and has a choice between being placed in a supervised independent living placement or a THP Plus foster care option, why would they choose THP Plus foster care when they are not paid the $700 plus stipend directly from Child Welfare Services? I think this is a really good question, and I think I would say the primary reason, because at its face value, we kind of originally thought that as well, but what we're hearing in a lot of counties is that young people recognize that they do need supportive services. THP Plus foster care has, over 15 supportive services that it wraps around young people. to really give them a leg up in their education, their employment, connecting with other types of benefits, with their parenting if they're young parents. And so that is one possibility. A young person could potentially try a SILP, see that it does not take them as far as a THP plus foster care placement. A second reason, however, is because where is a young person with only $700 in benefits? To a young person, that can really seem like a good amount of money, but when they sit down with their social worker and complete the readiness assessment and look at their full costs, the $700 stipend provided by the supervised independent placement is not intended to be their full income. In order for it to meet their full living expenses, it needs to be combined with earned income, potentially financial aid, other sources of income. And so why they would choose it is because that $700 really isn't enough to cover their housing costs. Those are some thoughts. I think another reason is we know a lot of young people come into THP Plus because they have heard of people who've had success in the program, and they've heard that of the quality of support staff that's available. They know that there are caring adults there that can really offer some guidance. So those are just a few reasons. So let's go to some more questions. This one is for you, Debbie. And it says, can directors of foster youth programs meet monthly with foster youth and create TILP plans?
Well, the TILP plan is something that's created collaboratively between the child welfare social worker and the young person. Mm-hmm. So I would say that I think it sounds like a very creative idea, and I think there definitely could be a way in which meetings could be held with youth to help them define their goals, to figure out what they want to put into their TILP plan, to check on progress, because the TILP does only get updated with the social worker every 6 months, and so to review the TILP plans every month and see what the progress is that's being made, et cetera, to provide, sort of an additional motivation around that beyond the social worker, I think would be definitely feasible.
Another question, and some of these are reiterating points you did make. This is back on financial aid, Debbie. Since the funds will go to students directly, will they need to report it as income for financial aid purposes, or can they utilize both resources? If you could just reiterate your point on that.
So we do know that the federal aid regulation, or financial aid regulations, do include a specific exemption for Title IV income. So we're optimistic that even if this money goes directly to the young person, it won't need to be reported as income for financial aid, but we are waiting for official guidance from the Department of Education clarifying that. So don't have a definitive answer yet, but certainly our own research supports that it wouldn't be reported, and we'll be providing more information on that, disseminating that through all of our various email lists and such as soon as we have that guidance from the federal government.
This next one, just a quick clarification. Wouldn't it be easier to provide university housing via a supervised independent living placement rather than THP Plus? It is provided via a supervised independent living placement. THP Plus, so just to clarify that, young people living in a dorm, that is a supervised independent living placement. That is not THP Plus. Okay, Debbie. If someone drops out of school, do they lose eligibility for extended foster care benefits?
No, they don't necessarily lose eligibility. So we had talked about how there's a participation condition that's called removing barriers to employment that's quite broad. So at some point, if somebody dropped out of school and very clearly said, I'm going to sit around the house and watch TV all day long and do nothing, then at some point they would lose eligibility for benefits. But if they drop out of school and say, I'm going to start looking for a job, or I'm going to go into a substance abuse treatment, or I'm going to get my driver's license and look for child care, or any of those things, they could maintain access to those benefits.
All right. Next question If a kin gap youth is attending college and living in the dorms, does their former guardian still receive the foster care payment?
The answer to that is yes. So even though it can't be a SILP, as we had talked about, but even if the student is not physically living with the guardian, but is being supported by the guardian, as long as that guardian is helping that young person to be able to live in the dorm, they can live in the dorm, and that guardian can continue to receive the kin gap payment, assuming they meet all the various other eligibility criteria.
Okay, another quick question. Some college dorms have 3 to a room. Would that be approved as a SILP, even though a dorm setting?
The answer to that is yes. Actually, dorm settings do not have to undergo the health and safety inspection at all. So they are just, if it's a dorm, it's basically just approved by default. So even if it's 3 to a room, that's not a problem.
Okay. Another question is, if a parenting youth lives with a caregiver, like a relative or a foster parent, does the infant supplement go directly to the youth or to the caregiver?
It goes to the caregiver, and that's an important point because there actually is sometimes confusion where a young person is under the impression that even if they're living with, say, a foster parent and the payment is going to the foster parent, there is sometimes the impression that they're going to get the infant supplement themselves, and it actually does go to the caregiver. It doesn't go directly to the youth, unless it's a SILP and the whole payment is going directly to the youth. Mm-hmm. But if the regular payment is going to the caregiver, the infant supplement goes to the caregiver too.
Well, this person just left the web seminar, but I want to share their comment because I think it is really important. And the person says, as a former foster youth, I would like to add that I would have chosen to stay with my foster family if the situation was available over choosing to receive the $700 a month. I really want to, encourage that point of view. Many young people have lived for years successfully with foster families or relative caregivers, and the idea behind AB12 was not for all of these young people to exit those settings and live in THP Plus or supervised independent living, because while those placements hopefully will meet the needs of young people, they are a far cry from the kind of support and guidance that is provided in a family setting. And we know nationally almost all 18 to 24-year-olds live in some type of family setting, not independently. So I just wanted to share that point of view that was provided. Okay, although we do understand that not every foster home is going to meet a young person's needs, and that's another person who wrote in saying that for some young people, they will want to leave that setting. So like everything in child welfare, it's taking the time to meet the individual needs of the young person that's presenting themselves. So maybe just a couple more questions, and we're getting close to the end of our time. Here's a question for you, Debbie. Does the social worker have to help a youth find housing if they want to live in a SILP? Is that a requirement?
No, the social worker is not actually obligated to assist the young person to find housing for a SILP. So if that's the option that the person is choosing is the SILP, then that individual young person does have an obligation to kind of do the work to identify a placement site. And, some communities may create programs to help provide some assistance, but ultimately the non-minor dependent themselves, the young person themselves, has to identify the placement option. So that's a key difference between a SILP and other placement options.
Kind of a caveat I do want to put with that is sometimes when people hear that, they confuse that the county child welfare system, however, is obligated to provide a placement. So they don't need to identify the specific SILP, but it is their obligation to secure a placement for the young person if they've elected to remain in extended foster care. And this question is about youth who are AWOL. Debbie, if a youth is 18 and AWOL and returns after age 18, is he or she eligible?
Yes, so as long as their case was open and they had an order for out-of-home placement on their 18th birthday, even if they weren't AWOL from that placement on their 18th birthday, they're still eligible, and if they come back in then yes, they continue to maintain their eligibility.
Great. Well, I guess another question is a young person who participates in THP plus foster care able to get their payment directly as a young person is in the SILP?
They don't get the payment directly. The money does go to the provider agency. Now, in some cases, the provider agency may designate a certain amount of money to provide to that young person as an allowance to manage some amount of funds on their own. But that sort of varies by provider, and the payment actually does go to the provider, not to the young person.
Okay. Well, before we break, Tracy, I want to give you a chance to offer any clarification or additional information that you'd like to, any follow-up on questions that Debbie addressed or thoughts that came to you in the course of the presentation that you'd like to share with the group.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Debbie, for allowing me to be a part of this. First, I apologize if anyone heard me. I thought the mute button was on, and Debbie, I got to publicly apologize if I certainly disrupted you in the middle of the presentation. Just want to make sure you were able to keep your flow going, and you did a great job. So sorry about that. I did want to share, we recently had our regional reps meeting, and that is with the FYSI, the Foster Youth Success Initiative liaisons. We have one regional rep per the 10 regions of the California Community College system. We had a two-day meeting in which Debbie joined us and presented on the opportunity to come out and do these trainings. And it was very well received by the FYSI liaisons, and in particular the regional reps, to work with Debbie to have her come out and to reach out to the university partners in whatever local communities the colleges may be in. I've already had some inquiries from colleges that are going to reach out to Debbie. So for those of you to avoid duplication and definitely maximize opportunity for shared learning opportunities, I would make sure those of you from the universities are working with your FYSI liaisons, and you could coordinate having Debbie come and provide a local training. There was also discussion around Debbie possibly doing that training that same day with the child welfare side, or possibly inviting some of the child welfare partners into the training for half of the training or the latter part. And again, I'm sure that will vary from community to community. I also want to mention county mental health. One of somebody I've been working more and more with. What?
Could you not use your headset?
Oh gosh, sorry about that. Okay, I'm sorry. I usually don't have that problem. I hope people heard me okay.
I think given the time, you should probably just keep moving forward.
So thank you. So the bottom line is, university representatives, please connect with your Foster Youth Success Initiative liaisons at the colleges to coordinate Debbie coming for a training. That FYSI liaison, you could either email me for the list or go on the Chancellor's Office website for your local community college liaisons. And also to keep in mind the mental health partners that we have in the county through MHSA, such as in Riverside County. Janine Moore reached out and would love to be a part of that, so that we ensure our students continue to receive whatever resources and support they need with counseling and support as they go through all these life changes. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Debbie, for a great presentation. As Debbie shared with you, all this presentation taped and the PowerPoint is going to be available on the Fostering Connections website at cafosteringconnections.org, and we'll do our best to get it up in probably the next 24, 48 hours, and we'll also send an email out to you with that link, and really encourage everyone to take Debbie and Tracy up on their offer to come to your campus. We really want to have AB12 meet the promise that of really helping young people in post-secondary ed. And so on behalf of the John Burton Foundation and the College Pathways Initiative, thank you for being on the web seminar, and this concludes today's web seminar.